So, I have this question. One that's been poking at my cerebral cortex for the past 5 years. When Mass Effect 3 launched, it didn't take long for people to reach the end of one of gaming's best trilogies, but it was also an end that left many hardcore fans, including myself, unsatisfied. If you ask around forums and Discord chats, people will praise Mass Effect 3. Even if they mention not liking the ending, they generally hold the game up as one of, if not the best of the trilogy. But I don't. Is it just me? Am I the only one that sees Mass Effect 3 for what it really is, or have I just let my bitter feelings of betrayal cloud my judgment for the past 5 years? The launch of Mass Effect Andromeda got me thinking about Mass Effect again. I played through the first 2 games and enjoyed them just as much as I had years ago, maybe even more so. But when I loaded up Mass Effect 3, something happened. A rush of memories flooded my brain, and I remembered all the qualms I had with the game initially. Then I realized something. All the problems I had, all the questions, could be answered by something the first 2 games did really well. Player agency. Just how important is player agency? First, let's try to understand what player agency is. If you ask Google, player agency is the player's ability to impact the story through game design or gameplay. It describes the ability of a player to interact meaningfully with the game world. After a bit of searching, I found a post on an RPG forum that answers it pretty succinctly. I'll link to the post below, which goes into further detail. The post breaks it down to 3 main ideas. The player has control over their character's decisions. Those decisions have meaningful consequences. The player can reasonably assess what those consequences might be. Now that we have a starting point, let's take a look at Mass Effect 1 to see how it met all 3 ideas. In the beginning of the game, before you can walk or even move the camera, you're forced to pick a response from the dialogue wheel. This is actually an important first action, as it immediately establishes the link between player and character. Naturally, this carries throughout the rest of the game. Whenever there is something for Shepard to say, it's the player that decides what is said. There are a couple times Shepard may speak on his or her own, but these moments are few and far between and only serve to move the scene along. Throughout the game, Shepard has to make numerous tough decisions. While not all of them have galaxy-wide repercussions, the consequences can still be felt. Whether it's deciding the fate of the Rachni or helping Samesh Bhatti retrieve his wife's body, the consequences come about because the player made that choice. At no point does Mass Effect give you a false choice either. During the mission on Virmire, you have to decide the fate of one of your squad mates, Kaidan or Ashley. The game doesn't shy away from it and makes you feel the weight of that decision. Not only does the surviving crewmate express grief for being the one that lived, for the rest of the game, its silhouette remains where the deceased crewmate once stood in the squad selection screen. A ghostly reminder of the sacrifice he had to make. And when you and Rex are at odds because he wants to prevent you from blowing up a potential cure for the genophage, you know that if you don't say the right thing, one of you won't be walking away. Mass Effect 1 does a fantastic job of letting the player feel in control. It allows the player to make every decision for Shepard, big or small, and gives those choices meaningful consequences. The game also respects the player by not subverting their decisions to move the story along a predetermined path. Mind you, there are numerous concessions the game makes to keep them on track. For example, the player can't kill every NPC they come across. In fact, the only killable NPCs are the ones the game designates as bad guys. But this isn't just a problem with Mass Effect, it's a convention of most modern games. While some games do let the player carve a murderous path between them and whatever money, loot, or items NPCs may be holding, even games like Fallout 4 or GTA 5 don't let the player randomly kill NPCs essential to the story. However, The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, which released in 2002, lets the player appease their dark passenger. But if they kill an essential NPC, the main plot will come to an abrupt end. The game won't fail or reload to the last save. Instead, a message pops up informing the player the world is now doomed because they happen to have killed a shirtless old man with a skoomer problem. The player can manually reload a previous save and avoid doom altogether, but the fact the game allows you to continue on in that doomed world is awesome. It makes you feel more a part of the world, like an actual participant and not just a passerby. With the fatal swing of a sword, Morrowind hits all three tenets of player agency in one swift strike. It allows you to kill whoever you want, actually have them die, and forces you to live with the repercussions. But as awesome as that is, the lack of that level of agency in Mass Effect doesn't detract from the experience it does give you. It still thrusts you into an intriguing universe whose story grips you from the beginning. Mass Effect 2 would improve on the first in just about every way. While more streamlined than its predecessor, its story never sidelined player agency. In fact, with the inclusion of Paragon and Renegade interrupts, player agency was at an all-time high. However, Mass Effect 3 would rip out most of the agency the franchise was famous for. In stark contrast to the original Mass Effect, the first time Shepard speaks in 3, the player has no input whatsoever. In the opening minutes of the game, the player is prompted for dialogue 3 times. The options are so few and far between, they may as well not even be there. Shepard no longer feels like an extension of the player, but a separate person that occasionally asks for your opinion. Unfortunately, the first 10 minutes are only a sign of things to come. Most conversations play off more as cutscenes where the player is forced to sit and watch as Shepard engages in exposition-heavy conversations. When the dialogue wheel does pop up, more often than not, there are only two choices, more if there is an investigate prompt. As you explore the Citadel, you'll occasionally run into NPCs arguing with one another. In these cases, Shepard auto-responds. There isn't even a dialogue wheel. You still decide what side to take, but without any indication of Shepard's tone or choice of words, you'll sometimes choose a side only to disagree with what Shepard actually says. It's clear BioWare had a specific story they wanted to tell in 3, and as a result, it didn't account for any wiggle room when it came to mission structure. When the game starts, you are immediately sent to Mars, after which you head straight to the Citadel. From there, you are sent to Palaven's moon to get support from the Turians, but the Turians want help from the Krogan. But to get Krogan support, you have to aid in the cure of the genophage. There is no choice in how this sequence plays out. You are given one priority mission at a time, only the completion of which nets you the next one down the line. One mission leads to the next, which leads to the next. It's a linear mission progression. While not bad in and of itself, it doesn't lend well to player agency. The worst of it comes when the character Kai Lang is introduced as the thorn in your side. You have multiple encounters with him, but since the story dictates you kill him at the end of the game, each previous encounter is merely an exercise of wasted time. There is no possible way to kill him and no chance you can convince him to pull the trigger on himself. Your agency in these encounters is just put to the side. Of course, in order to tell a singular story, some aspect of the game has to be linear. The first Mass Effect was bookended with linear missions, but the core of the game, the whole second act, if you will, was open-ended. The first two missions, for all intents and purposes, acted as the tutorial of the game, keeping you in a somewhat controlled area to introduce the mechanics and flesh out the universe. With Eden Prime being more focused on combat and introducing Saren as the main villain, the Citadel acted as a practice run for what the rest of the game would be. An explorable space with a single main objective, but how you went about that objective was up to you. There were two avenues you could take: find Garrus Vakarian or find Urdnot Wrex. Following either lead will net you the evidence against Saren. You aren't forced to find both in order to complete the mission. In fact, you can ignore one and never recruit them to your team. But once that is all said and done, you're given the keys to the Normandy and the game opens up. You're given 3 main missions, and you can do them in any order. The game will throw one more mission your way as you progress, but it isn't imperative that you complete it immediately. But once all missions are complete, the game once again forces you down a linear path, but this is fine. The majority of the game let you choose what missions to do and in which order. Mass Effect 3, on the other hand, forces you down a linear path for the whole main story thread. It makes the game feel more focused, but only if you're just mainlining the game and not adventuring to other systems to find side quests. Otherwise, it feels like you're wasting time while Earth is burning. Within the context of the story, it makes sense why Shepard would be so focused on finding support, but I think that's where the problem lies. The story in Mass Effect 3 overtakes the game and diminishes almost all agency the player has left. What does it matter if I cure the genophage or sabotage it? What difference does it make if I have the Krogans backing me or the Solarians? What problem does saving the Arachnid Queen solve that would have otherwise been harder to obtain, if not made impossible, without her support? In the end, none of it matters. While there is some agency in whose support you get, I question what difference it makes. Regardless of who helps out, the Battle of London goes just as poorly all the same. If there was ever a time to make good on all the choices from the previous games, it would be at the end of 3. Every choice helping or hindering your final push toward ending the Reaper threat, each choice solving or creating a distinct problem. But none of it actually bears any real fruit. Every choice Shepard makes becomes irrelevant by the end. You aren't forced to deal with the repercussions of your decisions by any real means. And that is the biggest problem with the end of Mass Effect 3. Not the choices themselves, but the fact the game gives them to you in the first place. Instead of tailoring the story and game to fit the choices you made, BioWare let the player decide how the game ends. Ironically, by giving the player choice here, BioWare takes meaning away from all previous choices. Nothing you do prior to this moment matters. This design choice ignores the second idea of player agency. Players' decisions have meaningful consequences. Suffice to say that Mass Effect 3 tears away any meaningfulness from itself with its lack of agency. Sure, there are some well-executed moments, but all in all, it fails to satisfy any of the agency the series claimed it had. It's obvious after putting so many hours into Mass Effect 3, the game was rushed out. It was the biggest game of the original trilogy, but had the least amount of time worked on it. Only 2 years. Had BioWare been given enough time, I'm sure many of the problems would have been addressed. I think it's safe to say that player agency is very important in games. It's the dividing line between watching a story play out and being an active participant in one. It allows you to make meaningful decisions and see them play out in fantastical ways. It brings thought experiments to life and forces you to question and challenge previously held beliefs. Player agency is gaming when you get down to it, whether it's through controller, phone, tablet, dice, or pen and paper. It's the connection between you and ideas worth experiencing. But when a game strips agency away from you, it starts to bear its seams. It forces you to stare at all the little mistakes and makes you question the reality you've spent countless time in. It makes you realize not everything is as it should be, shining a spotlight on those seams it tries so hard to hide. For me, it brings up more questions. How could player agency have been reinforced through gameplay? Should story dictate gameplay, or should gameplay dictate story? I hope I have brought to light some issues you may not have noticed, while inspiring you to question that which you took for granted. I hope further exploration of these problems will continue to bring to light the missteps and mistakes that derive from game development, hopefully inspiring developers to push their craft past the limits and bring an understanding to gamers for what developers go through to craft the games we hold so dear. Otherwise, I fear an ever-growing chasm between the two. Sincerely, a concerned gamer.